Hi, welcome to Minutes with Mickey. A time for us to wonder about the story that we find in 2 Kings chapter 17. This is where Israel is finally taken away into captivity. The story from last week showed us that actually Assyria had come down and taken over Syria, which is, of course, just north of where Israel would be. So it only makes sense that this point in time would be the next step for Israel. They have had nothing but bad kings. And it says this in the story very clearly, that Israel had done nothing to be pleasing to the Lord. They had kept the high places. They had worshipped idols. And so God allowed them for them to be captured. So Assyria captured Israel and carried them away. In a sense, it isn't as if they decimated the land and then all of a sudden the whole area of Israel had no people in it. It's just that now it became part of the Assyrian nation. And so Assyria, as it was growing, and if you remember correctly, if you looked at the map, the northern part of the Tigris and Euphrates River, that northern area, that whole Mesopotamian area, that's where Assyria was. And Syria was the other area, Damascus and north of Israel, and Assyria had taken over Syria on the bequest of Judah asking for help. So now we have Assyria really huge in this whole area. And so then the nation of Israel gets taken away and destroyed. Assyria treats them horribly as a message, sending a message to everybody else: don't do things against the king of Assyria. And this is this horrible nation. God wanted them to suffer this consequence. It's almost as if God keeps saying, please obey me. And then every time we don't, it's like just getting constant consequences for this. But interestingly enough, even when they were taken away, they didn't turn back to God. Even after being now absorbed by Assyria and no longer having their own nation, it tells us in the text that they just simply knew nothing about the God of Israel, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they knew nothing of this God, and so they just automatically just started worshiping the gods of Assyria, and God sent lions in order to discipline them and punish them for this horrible behavior that they were having. And the people, the priests of Assyria said, you know, bad things are happening down in this part of your new kingdom, King Assyria, this your part of your area. Apparently there's a god of that land who isn't being worshipped properly. And I find this really fascinating because you see, people back then thought that you had to do something to appease the gods of their area in order to make things go well. So you had to do certain things to make the sun god happy. You'd have to do certain things to make the rain god happy. You'd have to do certain things to make the god of this river happy, or the god of insects happy, or whatever it might be. So down here in the land where Israel always lived, and they're still living there in a sense, some of them got taken up to Damascus, but they're there. The prophets or the priests of Assyria are saying, look, something's happening here. The god of that land must be very unhappy because they're killing these people down there. So the king says, gee, I think they ought to know more about that God, the God of their land. So take them back there and find a way to get them to learn more about their God. Isn't that just fascinating? I want to read more about that. I want to go back into the text and look at some more of that. Like, my goodness, what does this mean? Isn't it interesting that there's almost wisdom from the king of Assyria, who's in Nineveh, which we know from the Jonah story, we didn't like Nineveh at all. He's saying wise things. Take those people back. Take them back. Help them learn about their God. Now, obviously, he's not saying the God, but the God of that land. So a few priests were selected, and they went back to Samaria, and they taught the Samaritans how to properly worship the Lord. And here's what happened. Oh, we want to worship this God too? Okay, we can do that. And they kept worshiping the other gods, And they kept the whole thing going as a both and for many years, which is why they stayed in exile, I believe. Here's the biggest question that we have to ask ourselves. What of the world around us have we absorbed as part of our worship that isn't the worship of the Holy God, the only God, the God who created us? What have we dragged in and are keeping both and going? What kind of danger are we in? Each one of us in our own personal life have to think about this. God continues to show us He wants us to be faithful to Him and Him alone. And here's what happens when we're not. Are we going to learn from these stories, or are we going to repeat history? It's something that I wonder about. And I pray deeply for all of us that we would seek God's face and Him alone. Have a great week.